this is Liz from People I Think Are Cool, a bi-weekly podcast where I interview my favorite creatives from across the globe. If you're looking for a dose of creative inspiration, then go to peopleithinkarecool.com or subscribe to People I Think Are Cool on iTunes and Stitcher.
You like film, from cult to classic, from blockbuster to B-movies. And there just isn't that one place with all the fan fervor and passion that's covering the kind of mad, diverse brilliance that you love.
Well, that's where you're wrong.
AfterMovieDiner.com is that fan-built movie nirvana just for you, featuring the sweet, sweet writings of the wife dork herself. AfterMovieDiner.com. Go there. Be the best you can be.
Official podcast of the Alamo Drafthouse Winchester.
Welcome to another edition of the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast. I am your host, Brad Gullickson, Mouth Dork, and I am joined today in the Dork Cave by Billy Dass, the Indie Dork. What's up, Billy?
Not too much. I am super excited to be here today, though, because we are chatting with Daniel Goldhaber and Issa Mazzei, co-writers, co-directors, although they're not quite billed like that on it, but they're co-creators of the film Cam, which is available now on Netflix.
Major fan of this movie. It is incredible. You really should watch this film before listening to this conversation. Not to say that they spoil a ton of the plot, although I think you will not appreciate the conversation without fully investing yourself to the movie. So do that. It's on Netflix. Go now. Do it. And then come back.
We'll still be here when you get back.
We'll be here.
All right.
See? We're still here.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! And without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation. 3, 2, 1. CHATcast!
Yeah!
And we are really excited to have with us on the show today. This is a real treat because Billy and I both loved Cam so much, and we are honored to have director, writer, producer Daniel Goldhaber on the show, along with writer, producer Issa Mazzei. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So I think we just want to start with the beginning of this production. How did it evolve to the film that we got?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started out from, conversations that Danny and I had back when I was a cam girl. And, I actually hired him to shoot some porn for me. And, I know he had gone to film school. He kind of knew what he was doing. So we worked together in that capacity. And, I was really proud of the work I was doing as a cam girl. I was really excited to bring him into that world and kind of show him what I was doing. And, out of those conversations kind of came this desire that I had to portray a sex worker in the media that was different from how it had been done before, because I was very frustrated with many of the portrayals of, sex work in general in movies and TV. And so, from that desire, we started coming up with the idea for Cam.
And, for me, it was this situation where, I had definitely been, on some level, introduced to the ideas of, sex work is kind of a personal choice, but I hadn't really encountered it in my life. And so, part of what those initial conversations were about were Issa taking me through the fact that, what she was doing was a form of creative expression. It was a form of, she was working essentially as a creative professional. It was a form of self-discovery, and it was, I think that we think a lot about this idea of sex work needn't necessarily be empowering, which it totally can be, but beyond that, of sex work is work. And that was something that, she was kind of introducing me to, and that we wanted to bring to a wider audience.
Now, when Issa, when you say that Danny had engaged him to shoot porn for you, Danny, is that the first time that you had done something like that?
Yeah, more or less in a professional context, and it was a really cool experience because I've been a pretty avid porn consumer since I was, I don't know, probably in middle school, and I think that you kind of think of porn as a given. And I think that what I had never really considered, even though I was a filmmaker and I loved film probably since about the time I started watching porn, was the formal achievement of porn, the way that editing changes the way that you're engaging with a piece of porn, the aesthetics of porn, and the morals of those aesthetics. And so I think that as soon as Issa and I started watching, working on the videos for her, we were looking at reference films. We were talking about how we were going to shoot, how we were going to cut. And suddenly I started thinking about the ways that pornography is very made, is very created, and that creation had shaped my own sexuality. And that was a really eye-opening experience, and it was something that we wanted to also talk about in CAM, was the craft that goes into sex work and pornography.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated by, because multiple times so far, just even in the setup for the introduction of the idea for this, is about self-discovery and looking at who you are. And so, Issa, when you graduate college, is this a deliberate choice that you undertake because you want to explore and learn more about that side of yourself and see where that takes you? What was the impetus for that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly where it came from. And I think, again, that, that is what CAM is about, and that is part of what we wanted to show with CAM, is that, when I told people, I was pretty open about being a CAM girl, and, before I was a CAM girl, I had a sugar daddy, and I was very open about having a sugar daddy as well, and, people would, constantly say, oh, are you in that much debt? Do you need help? Should I lend you money? Are you desperate? Why would you do this? And for me, it absolutely came from, I wanted to do sex work. I had always thought about being a stripper. I liked taking my clothes off. I was an exhibitionist. I wanted to explore these facets of my sexuality and my identity that I had been, slut-shamed for all of high school and college as well. And, that society was constantly telling me to repress and that it wasn't good, these parts of me. And I decided, I want to embrace them. I want to explore them. I want to see where they go and where they come from and what they are. And so that was why I did sex work. And then beyond that, once I started doing it, I fell in love with so many different aspects of it that I think are, in many other careers as well. Like, I fell in love with figuring out how to brand myself and market myself and design my shows and what aesthetic I was going to do. And so even beyond the sex part of it, it became a really cool, entrepreneurial experience for me. And I think that's, another thing that I wanted to put in the film, because I think it's something that people forget about sex workers too, is that, many of them are running their own businesses, and there's that whole side of it that can be really fulfilling as well.
And with the screenplay, how did you arrive to this particular story? Was this always the genre you wanted to approach cam work with?
We decided to do a genre film, I think, before we even had an idea of what that would look like. We kind of had the idea for the opening scene based on a show that I wanted to do in my own cam room. And then, beyond that, we were having all these conversations about what I really wanted to say about sex work. And what it came down to, for me, was really wanting to explore this idea of performative identity and kind of this paranoia that I think we all have on social media about, these digital selves that we curate, that we derive validation from. And I think, we decided to do genre just because, first of all, we're both genre fans. I love horror. I grew up on horror. That's my favorite thing. And beyond that, I think it's a really cool way where we could explore these ideas, but, in a way that would be really engaging to a mainstream audience. Because, originally I thought about doing a documentary, and that's actually what I approached Danny with first. I said, I want to make a doc. But we realized that, we didn't want the audience to be self-selecting. We didn't want it to just be people that were already interested in the topic or maybe wanted to learn more about the topic. I wanted people to watch the movie because it was a cool, thrilling movie, and then also, learn something.
Yeah, I think that was my attraction to the movie, was the way in which let me say this. I finished Cam and I exhaled at the end of the movie and realized how tense I was through the course of the film. And I don't think that tension comes just from the villain of the story. I think the tension comes from what's going on in the character's life and the way that people are interacting with her based on the choices that she's making and the challenges that she faces as a result of that. Like, it is an incredibly tense piece of work. I mean, I assume, obviously, that a cam demon is not related from your personal experience with that, but is the tension that comes along with those multiple identities something that translates over from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, obviously there's nothing literal like that happened to me while I was camming, but it came from, I think there are two bad things in the film. One of them is Lola, and then one of them is the way that society stigmatizes Alice and therefore won't help her or believe her, from the cops to kind of how the scene goes down at the birthday party. And so, those were literal anxieties that I had being an out sex worker. And then, Lola, again, she comes from that place of this digital identity and wondering, do my viewers actually like me, or do they just like this fake version of me? And more than that, Lola quite literally comes from this experience of having my content pirated and put online with, my watermark scrubbed out and in no way attributed to me anymore. And it was extremely alienating because I would wake up and see myself on Pornhub. And it was me, and it looked like me, and it sounded like me, but no one, it would have 7,000 views or whatever, and not a single one of those 7,000 people would have any way to link what they were watching back to me. And that was so terrifying, and I think not an experience that's necessarily isolated to sex work. I think in porn, it's especially poignant because you are naked. It is your sexual vulnerability there. But I think everyone who has photos and videos of themselves online can kind of relate to this feeling of, you're just putting parts of yourself into this void, and you no longer have control over them, and that is scary.
And that was also very much, my entry point into the stakes of the film personally, where it was that, we wanted to send the message that sex work is work. We wanted this to be a movie that a lot of people could relate to, and I think that most people today can relate to the tension of having a digital identity and to the fragility of that digital identity, to the fact that, we see the avatars of ourselves that are on Facebook or Twitter as more real in a sense than we are, because they are the most public-facing parts of ourselves. And we almost take those parts of other people to be the most real parts of them. But they're really easily corruptible and misinterpretable and stealable. And I think that, because that's the nature of a digital existence. So we really wanted to speak to that anxiety. And I think that, often the way that we talked about the movie is that it's a psychological thriller about digital identity set in the world of webcam pornography. So we wanted to kind of really do justice to that world and to the ethnography of that world, but ultimately I think, with themes that are far more universal and relatable. Yes. This is that was my experience with the movie is watching that unfold. But like, I don't know, I guess kind of you sort of see somebody who is so comfortable putting themselves out there, naked, obviously quite literally, but I sort of look at somebody like that and I imbue them with a sense of invulnerability. And I don't think that invulnerability is real. I think it's perceived, and I think that there's a lot of fragility in that relationship. And I wonder, how does protecting that kind of bubble of creativity in that space inform you guys' creative relationship as you try and tell a very delicate story like that?
I think what it comes down to, for us at least, and something we've definitely learned, is it's about being aware of this boundary between what's real and what isn't real. And I think it's really easy for us, me in the context of a performer or us in the context of the creators of CAM, to derive personal validation from what people are saying about us or the film on the internet, or how people are responding to things that, like, literally how many people like an Instagram post, which I think it sounds so funny to say that, but I think we all do, especially when you post things that are real and vulnerable, and you are expressing something really raw. And in a way, I mean, CAM is a very raw expression for both of us as well. And so, sometimes people ask, they say, oh, are you guys anti-internet? Should we not be posting these things on the internet? Should we not be sharing ourselves on the internet? And I think absolutely that's not the case. Like, the internet is a beautiful, incredible, collaborative place that has its dark sides, but at the end of the day, I think it's really cool that we all are able to have these forms of self-expression online. And I think the key is just to be so aware of when you're deriving your personal validation from your digital identity and keeping those two separate and drawing those boundaries within yourself to recognize that, you know, it's a place for you to express yourself and be creative, but it doesn't need to be the place where you derive your worth from.
And that's also, you know, that's kind of, for us, the lesson that Alice learns at the end of the movie. It's frustrating because I think that some people are like, oh, she just goes back and she doesn't learn her lesson. But it's like, she does. You know, when she starts the movie, she's trying to be herself online, but this version of herself that she thinks is going to be more pleasing to the people in her room. And, you know, that is creating a certain cognitive dissonance in her. And then what happens is that other self, that performed self, runs off with a mind of its own in this kind of very algorithmic way. And Alice does not want to give up her passion. She does not want to give up camming, but she has to find a way to do it when she's protected. And what she realizes at the end of the movie is the way for her to do that is to not validate herself on her show, but to validate herself as a performer. That, you know, at the beginning of the movie, she's very resistant to her mother's makeup. At the end of the movie, she's embraced her mother's makeup. She's embraced the artifice of her performative femininity and said, you know, I can just be a great craftsman and I can derive validation from that craftsmanship. And I think that maybe that's like a subtle point, but I think that, you know, we tried to demonstrate that as clearly as we could with, you know, the makeup and the wig and the kind of, you know, very different from how we understand Alice and Lola identity that she adopts at the end of the movie.
I think without the ending where she goes back, the movie is a totally different thing. In fact, if you get to the end of that movie and you see that and think, oh gosh, she's going back to I feel like you missed the take on the movie. Like, her going back and embracing it is everything. That's what elevates the movie to something really deeply interesting, at least from my take.
Oh, thank you so much. We agree.
Yeah, we agree.
Yeah, a lot of people do not agree. A lot of people do not like the ending, and I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how the response to the end of the movie develops as time goes on, because I think that it you know, I also have a lot of people who didn't like the ending and then go back and they're like, I had to watch the movie 2 months later, and then they do, and then I think they start unlocking some of those things, because one of the things that we're proudest of about the movie is that there's no politics in this film. There's no moment where Alice explains or defends herself to anybody. And yet, I think a lot of people understand her, and they understand what she's doing and why she's doing it. And I think that, you know, down to the fact that the New York Times called the movie feminist. And I think that to me is a real success, because it's like, that's the New York Times calling a movie that's advocating for the destigmatization of sex work a feminist movie. And I think that's cool. But I think that that's also, you know, those politics are hidden, and they're hidden in empathy. And I think that sometimes that can take a little while for people to warm up to.
Yeah.
Now, could we just go back a little bit to process and your collaboration when you're getting together? How are you working on this story? How are you breaking it down?
I mean, you know, I think that Martin Scorsese talks about his process as a talking process. Ours is very much a yelling process.
We scream a lot. No, but it works. I mean, luckily, we've been working together since we were in high school. Danny ran a theater company, and I guess produced some of his plays. So we have a kind of relationship where, luckily, you know, I can write a page and he can just say, this is bad, and that's okay. I don't need the compliment sandwich from him, which is nice. But really, it's extremely collaborative. Like, you know, that's why it's a film by us. Like, we were, you know, yes, I would be writing the pages and he would be reading the pages, and then we would be talking about the pages. But at the end of the day, we were building out scenes together. We were talking about lighting. We were watching references and talking about tone. We were talking about score. We were making casting decisions, like, during the writing process. So for us, it's been perhaps more collaborative than just writer-director. You know, even though, yes, I was doing more of the craft of writing and Danny was doing more of the craft of directing, it was really a vision that we built together from day one.
Because I think any movie is about its ideas and then the execution of those ideas. And ultimately, I think that, we always saw the movie as like kind of fundamentally the ideas of the movie were generated by Issa and the execution of the movie was generated by me. But there's a constant process there of, somebody comes up with an idea and you're like, I can't execute that idea, or I come up with a piece of execution and he's just like, that's fundamentally at odds with the idea of the movie. And ultimately, I think that process of collaboration and that back and forth was just kind of, I think, the way that we like to make movies, which is really involving every member of the cast and crew as intimately as they'll have it. So our editor was on set. Our sound designer made the tip noises and the sounds for the site before we even went into production. Like for me, it's really like what makes filmmaking so amazing is that it is a team sport, and it is you build a family, and the more that you can kind of make it that collective experience for everyone, I think the better.
So then moving forward to actual production stage, we talked a little bit about preserving the creative bubble between you two and translating a very real story to a fictional horror genre. How did you work your relationship with Madeline Brewer, and what's that creative relationship like on set?
It was, Maddie's amazing. She's an incredible collaborator, and ultimately it was a pretty natural extension of what we had already set up. So we also we didn't have that much time to prep with her. We cast her pretty late in the game. Our rehearsal was Issa and I read through the script with her over the course of the night. And we basically wanted her to just really own the character and own her portion of the movie. So we basically read through the script and we're like, any line that doesn't sound like good to you or natural to you, let's rewrite it for your voice and how you see this character. And so we did that, and then we met up. We did some fittings and stuff, and then we met up the first day on set. And basically the way it went was, Issa and I had a pretty united idea of what needed to happen. So I was the person kind of, directing the performance on a moment by moment basis most of the time with just notes and stuff. But we had a lot of kind of the larger conversations where we need to go off in a room and figure out like what's the vision here, how are we executing that. Those were just kind of 3-person conversations. And that's not to say that any of this was particularly easy, because I had never directed a professional crew before, and so there were a lot of kind of learning curves of figuring out how I work as a director with like a real movie at the same time of trying to figure out how to integrate kind of the nature of my collaboration with Issa in a way that was seamless, and like that was tricky. But ultimately, I think it worked out. And some of the way that looked was there are sequences in the movie that Issa directed, like the Vibertron scene, and
Right.
That was really critical because she was there protecting the movie's need to be from Alice's point of view in how it's executed visually. And so there were times where, even though we had a female DP, we would have a shot and Issa would run on set and be like, this shot's really problematic. And that was, sometimes that would, cause a moment of conflict because we're like, we got to change the lens, we have to change the lighting. But ultimately I think that, that all worked out really well, and again was just kind of a collaboration from top to bottom. I think one of the other things that's important to kind of mention is that I think that with Maddie in terms of owning her own role, one of the other things that we did to that effect was we had a nudity rider which we had to have for just the SAG contract, and that was just kind of our catch-all of this is what's going to be in every scene in the movie at most. But we had separately told Maddie look, on the day, it's up to you. We're not going to enforce your nudity rider, which people do all the time. And this is why, often you'll watch a movie with nudity and you'll see the actress look horribly uncomfortable. Because, it's not what she thought it would be or something like that. And so, that ended up being a really, incredible thing for that collaboration because, this is a movie about a character who needs to own her own sexuality, and Maddie needed to own her own sexuality in the movie. And so there were days where Maddie came on set and she was like, I think there needs to be more nudity in the scene. And there were days that Maddie came on set and said, I think the nudity in the scene feels gratuitous. And she was always right. And she, there was a sequence in the movie that I think she saved by saying, we need to tone the nudity down here because it just doesn't feel like it's coming from the character in a natural place. and that was a place where, that was a huge conversation that me, her, and Issa had, but ultimately, we listened to her, and she was, 100% right. So
I'm deeply curious about like what those creative conversations are like, and I was wondering if you two would be willing to like unpack an example of when there was an issue with a shot where somebody was like, well, I feel like this isn't the look or the direction that we want the camera to be pointing, or where maybe Maddie had a disagreement that you guys worked together to kind of resolve, because I think that really gets like that relationship building and that interaction gets down to like the craft of what makes a movie like this be electric once you get to the screen, and so that's why I'm very fascinated by it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the two examples that come to mind that are kind of most, I think, exemplative of how it worked for us was, there was one moment that was kind of quick with not a lot of discussion, and that was the Vibertron scene, which, as Danny mentioned, I had a directorial role in that, and I remember, Maddie took off her robe, and this call went up on set, and I don't remember who said it first, but someone was like, ice, we need ice for Maddie's nipples, because that is just a standard in filmmaking, and I think, the issue when we talk about stripping the male gaze out of a film, something that's not engaged with, is that, like, it's a legacy of the male gaze, because it has been a male-dominated industry since its birth, and so there are these standards in filmmaking practice, one of which still to date is very common, which is you ice an actress's nipples when they're going to be on screen, because hard nipples are more attractive to the male gaze, and it's inherently problematic, but it's also such a standard that like everyone on set on this super super aware, super feminist set, this call went up for ice, and everyone's just like, oh, ice, yeah, we need to get ice, and a PA started running to get ice. And even for me, it took a second for me to be like, whoa, a second, we are not icing her nipples. What are we talking about? And it's almost like the second I called it out, everyone kind of laughed and was like, oh my God, of course we're not going to do this. This is crazy. Why would you do this? But it takes that constant awareness and that constant self-checking. And, that's an example of where it was pretty obvious to all of us that was the right solution and we were all on the same page. But there were other examples like the shot where Maddie is adjusting her bow tie in the mirror. And, Danny and Kate are filmmakers. They, Kate, our DP, they know how to frame a shot. They know how to light a shot much better than I do. I didn't go to film school. And they framed the shot for the bow tie. And what I saw on set from Video Village was a shot that showed Maddie's breasts and not her face.
Right.
And so I came on to set and I said, you need to tilt the camera up. And to me, it was such a simple request. It was like, just tilt the camera up. But to them, it was, okay, if we tilt the camera up, we have to relight, we have to reframe, we have to change the lens on the camera. Like, for me, it's like, tilt the camera up, it's 2 seconds. To them, it's like, no, this is like an involved process of a shot that we've already discussed, we've already lit, we've already decided the shot. And so what was so cool about it is that, there was definitely this immediate pushback where I was like, tilt the camera up, and Danny's like, you don't understand what you're asking me to do. And Kate is like, you don't understand what you're asking me to do.
And more specifically, we were like, this shot isn't problematic. It's a shot of the bow tie. The shot has a clear subject. There's nothing gazy about it.
Right.
And I think that what Issa correctly identified is, but you can still engage in that legacy. Even if the shot has a different subject, even if it's incidental, if it just happens to be a factor of the framing.
It's still an objectifying shot. And so I think what was so cool about that, yeah, exactly, Danny's right, is that we were able to very quickly, because we were all on the same page with the vision and wanting to strip the male gaze out of the film and wanting these representations of female bodies to not be problematic, it was really easy for us to kind of have these discussions. It's probably like 5 or 10 minutes where we had to pause everything and talk about them. But what was so cool is that because we were so careful, and luckily the crew was so self-selecting and who wanted to work on this movie anyway, everyone was there to engage in these conversations and to learn from each other. And so we were able to have this productive discussion and decide, yes, okay, we're going to reshoot this. And we reshot it, and that's the shot that's in the film now. And it's not problematic, I don't think. So.
And I mean, maybe the another one to answer the explicit conversation with Maddie, is the big conversation that we had about her level of nudity was in the climax of the film. When Lola says, I want you to strip, in the script, she fully stripped to being naked. And for Issa and I, we had seen that as, this very symbolic, she's stripping off all of her clothes because she's about to be reborn in blood, and it was a very kind of high-minded idea. And on the day, Maddie was just like, I don't think Alice is going to expose herself in that way right now. That's not what she's doing. That's not her camp practice. That's not how she engages with her own nudity. It comes from a very different place for her. And we were like, but the images, but the theme, and Maddie's answer to that was like, I totally get that. You guys are so smart, and that's such a cool idea. And also, it's not the character, and I don't feel it. And I think that that was a 45-minute conversation where we stopped shooting because it was in the script. We talked to her about it earlier, and we were just like, the shot, the image, the idea, and we just all took the time to really talk about it. And for Maddie to, and she saved the movie. Like, I can't imagine how shitty that last 2.5 minutes of that scene would be if she was totally naked, because it just wouldn't have worked, because it wouldn't have felt like it was coming from the character. And ultimately, it was about, luckily having producers who were willing to give us the time to stop filming for 45 minutes to have that conversation. But I think that that's what makes great filmmaking is those exchanges of ideas.
Well, that's an amazing moment there for me, because to stop for 45 minutes on a day, and I imagine you don't have a lot of days on this movie, right?
We shot in 20 days.
Yeah, so like 45 minutes to have that conversation, that's a lot of time. And can you just...
our producers reminded us.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to talk about. Like, what is that relationship that you have with your producers and also with your crew that you can afford to do something like that? Or is it just like, too bad, so sad to that crew? Or are they understanding or what have you?
I mean, we definitely don't want to paint a picture that this was like a kumbaya loving circle where everyone just like respected each other. Like, I mean, we did, but it was tough. It was tough. And I think that there was a lot of tension between all of us and the AD and the producers, and but I think we approached this film, and I mean, Danny can speak more to the set dynamics as well, but from the second we took this film out to sell it, we had an ethic, we had a manifesto, we had this vision, and we agreed from day one we would rather not make this film than make this film incorrectly. Yeah. And that led to us turning down money. That led to us walking away from financing offers. That led to us, having, unfortunately, to fire someone who was not an appropriate match for the set. We had to turn down actors and who didn't understand the politics of it. And I think that, it was the same with the crew where, we were like, this needs to be a conversation. However long this takes, it needs to happen. And luckily, I think because we approached the film from that perspective, from day one, it was something that was understood, that like at the end of the day, our producer understood that and trusted us and knew that we wanted to make a very special, specific type of film that was going to engage in this dialogue. And so he let us have that time. And I think that's rare, but I think it also came from us having that conviction from day one. It wasn't something we just added on at the end, like, oh my God, we need to talk for 45 minutes. It was like, this is important.
And I think it's a lesson for filmmakers in general in terms of working with producers or studios, because this was ultimately still a film that was financed by Blumhouse, which is they're a significant company that I think let us make a movie that is pretty insane.
Yeah.
That we never got a minute of pushback from on anything. Not a thing. The notes were about making it a more entertaining movie and a better watch. But none of the kind of hot button stuff in this movie got any pushback, and it was because we were 100% upfront with what we wanted to do with the movie from the beginning, with everybody. And I think that there's this sense out there among filmmakers that you have to trick money into giving it to you. Like, you have to trick people into giving you money. You have to lie to investors. You have to hide your true intentions. And I think that that's a recipe for disaster, because you get to that moment where you need 45 minutes to talk to your actress, and your producer doesn't understand why. And I think that, it's to me, the biggest lesson from this project was that you can just be upfront with people. and you know, allow your ideas and your film and your talent to speak for itself, and people will self-select and come to you. And I think that, you know, look, maybe I'll be proven wrong later in my career, but at least for this first film, that was the saving grace of the entire project.
So where did that confidence come from?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, like, that's pretty bold for your first film to have that confidence and that point of view. Where did that come from?
Definitely. I mean, I think it came from, you know, how personal this film is to both of us and how much we cared about what we cared about what we were doing, and also how tired we both were with the film industry in general, just being sloppy. People are sloppy. They're sloppy with representation. They're sloppy with problematic language. They're sloppy with objectifying women's bodies. They're sloppy with the morality of their films. And I think that a lot of people come into making films and they come from a good intention. They don't want to do things that are problematic. They want to make good films that are also making good representation. But they're sloppy because it's hard. This film, yes, like, we made it very quickly. I think from the day we had an idea to make a movie to the day it dropped on Netflix was exactly 3 years, which is insane for a first film, but insane for a film in general. But I think that's not to say it wasn't the most difficult thing we've ever had to do. Like, at 24 and 25, to sit there and have someone offering you financing if you're going to, you know, change the ending of your movie so that it's a morality tale, like, that's not to say that was easy for us, and that's not to say we didn't struggle with that. And I think it wasn't really a confidence in ourselves so much as this unwavering commitment to doing the right thing.
And I think that commitment and that confidence comes from the collaboration too. You know, I think that it starts with this idea, and you are reinforcing it in each other. And then Isabel Levy comes on, and then she keeps us on track when we're losing our faith and confidence, because she knows what the dream is. And so when we get, you know, weak, she kept us on board. And then Adam Hendricks comes in, and then he keeps the three of us together.
And I think something like literal, if people are like, oh, I want to make a film with, I have this vision, and I want it to be non-problematic, I want to do representation in this way or whatever, something that literally is actionable that helped us so much was a manifesto. We wrote a document. It is a Word document. It had like 10 things on it that before we even wrote the script, we were just like, we're going to make a movie about a sex worker. And we've made this document that said, like, these are the things that are non-negotiable for us. And having that document, our producers had that document, having that document to refer to when we're in the weeds and we're not even sure what way is up anymore or what day of the week it is, and we haven't eaten in 3 days, and we're so confused, and we have this thing to look at to remind us, like, this is the birth of your project. This is why you're doing this, and to constantly remember that was really, really helpful.
I love the idea of a manifesto. I think that's awesome. Like, and as like an actionable idea, because exactly like it's not like the fog of war, I guess, but it is like the fog of filmmaking, where you could have this thesis that you could just put on your door every day when you walk onto set and say, these are the 10 things that we're going to do no matter what. Like, I love that. That's awesome. I don't know if that's shareable, but I would love to see a copy of it.
We don't want to share it because it doesn't quite make sense outside of, like...
Yeah, we don't want to share the document itself, but we definitely love sharing the idea of the document itself, because
gotcha.
Also it doesn't have to apply just to films that are as, you know, maybe subversive or political as Cam. I think it can apply to all films. I think you could put on a piece of paper, do not objectify women's bodies for any type of movie that you're making, and just make it a rule for yourself, and then realize, like, that means engaging with conversations about nudity writers. That means engaging with your actress and how she's holding herself in sex scenes. That means engaging with, camera work in a new way. And, like, I think anyone can do that, and I think that it would make better films, because I think, you know, people love Cam because it's a fun, you know, thrilling movie. People love Cam because of the politics, but at the end of the day, I think people love Cam because it's refreshing. Like, this is what we want to see. This is the types of protagonists and the types of representation that we want. And I think that I think that audiences, that's what they want, and so I think it will make better films.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a screenwriter, Emily Carmichael. She's
I know Emily. She's great.
Yeah, like, because we talked about representation and like how do you do that, like actionable ways to succeed at that, because Issa, like what you were saying about people being sloppy when it comes to that, like I think that that's a real thing. And she, you know, the takeaway from our conversation with what she had to say was exactly your same message, which was be deliberate. If you don't make active, deliberate choices to not do those things, they'll creep into the work that you put out because they're insidious in that way. And if you don't have a manifesto, then you will slip on those things and you will become sloppy with it.
I think that a lesson that's kind of a larger idea there is that we have this idea in the arts, especially in the U.S., where art is just supposed to kind of flow from the artist, kind of unguided, unedited. It's just this like raw personal expression. The people who do it are geniuses. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
And I think that it's also a way for predominantly, you know, straight, rich white men to say, well, you know, this is just what the definition of art is, so if you want me to change, you're anti-art.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, making this film was absolutely a personal journey of questioning, like, my own inherent misogynies and my own problematic relationship to women. And that, you know, a lot of the process of making this film just between me and Issa was me learning from Issa kind of being patient enough to educate me. And I think that was the opposite of this being something that just flowed out of me. It was something that I really had to learn how to make this movie. And luckily had a creative partner that was willing to teach me. And I think that it's something that my thesis advisor, there's two quotes that like I always come up around this, which is that my thesis advisor is this amazing French filmmaker named Philippe Grandrieux. I was like really stuck on my thesis film, and I was just like really a wreck. And I was like, Philippe, this is just such a brutal thing for me. I'm really not doing well. And he's like, but if your film is to be transformative for its audience, it must be equally as transformative for you, the creator. And I think that that's true. And I think that we need to think of filmmaking as a more of a journey, not towards necessarily a destination, but towards this movie that is a record of that journey itself. And it's something that Godard said as well, which is that every film, whether it's a documentary or a fiction film, is a documentary of its own creation. And I think that that's why engaging with process so deeply and questioning your process and making sure that your process and your desire for an end goal is kind of such a reach is so that you can have a movie that accomplishes something.
So clearly you are, you know, you're referencing Godard and you're talking about what Scorsese said. You're a movie maniac, and I like to think of myself as a movie maniac as well. But I would like to, like, before you guys go, I'd like to talk a little bit about the influences cinematically or narratively to what went into the screenplay of Cam and then what went into the visuals of Cam.
Screenplay, I would say the two scripts we referred to the most were Whiplash and Black Swan.
Oh.
I think initially with like story conceit, because for us in terms of the sex work representation, we really wanted to engage with these like great artist narratives where like you don't question why Natalie Portman is killing herself for ballet. You don't question Miles Teller with his bleeding hands. You say, go artist, go. And so kind of engaging with the structure of those films, particularly in the first act where, you know, it's this implicit understanding of why, you know, and that can be seen in Cam where, like, we don't explain why she can. We don't explain her backstory of why she got into it or what her reasons are. We just say, you're going to understand this because I'm showing it to you in a way, you know, in similarly to how, you know, these great artist narratives are told. And so I think from, like, a story and especially the birth of the project perspective, those were two big influences on, like, a script level.
I'd say the other script and a little bit movie, but I think more of a story influence was Cronenberg. And that was it was his work that we always came back to when we were talking about how to wield and use genre. What do our moments of body horror mean? How are they telling the story of our character?
Yeah, Cronenberg we love because he engages with gore and body horror quite often, but it is never gratuitous.
Mm-hmm.
It's never there to just like shock you and look cool. It is always coming from a place of theme or character, which makes it that much more disturbing. And so we really engaged in a lot of conversations around that in terms of these face smashes and the gunshot, and making sure that nothing that was violent or sexual was gratuitous.
And that it had to do with story and character and theme, and with making a larger point. You know, and I just, like, one of our favorite things is structurally in the movie is that, you know, I talked already about what Alice's journey is, but we can mark that journey with the 3 moments of violence in the movie. The movie opens with a moment of fake violence that's masquerading as real violence. And that's the throat slit. And in the middle of the movie, there is a moment of digital violence, which is the height of Alice's sense of violation and loss of agency, and it's where she kind of recognizes the power of the digital. And the movie climaxes with a moment of real violence, in which Alice reclaims her identity by engaging with the reality of her own body on her show, and in such lets go of her need to have control over Lola anymore. Because she severed the connection between herself and that identity of hers. And so, you know, I think that we hope that people can kind of dig that out of the movie, but for us it needed to be there because we needed to make sure that all of those moments had a really clear purpose. In terms of the visuals of the film, you know, I think obviously Lynch and It Follows is a movie that Kate and I talked about a lot. Big Narcissus was a movie that was a really big influence for the design of the Pink Room, which, and if you're not familiar with it, it's an avant-garde film from, I think, the 60s that was originally commissioned as a gay porn film, but that the filmmakers kind of ran with and made this like really insane aesthetic object and landmark work of kind of gay avant-garde film, and I wanted to engage with that idea of like of a porn aesthetic, but that is, you know, kind of both a porn aesthetic and is engaging with this entire legacy of kind of queer filmmaking. And you know, so the Pink Room was kind of that, and then the Red Room from Twin Peaks. I think, you know, and then Unfriended was a huge reference point, because, you know, I think that it's something we haven't talked about as much here, but it's about, you know, actually replicating the digital experience cinematically was something that was monumentally difficult. And actually the hardest thing probably of the entire process was editing the movie, which took a full-time year, which I'm sure you guys know on a movie of this scale is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And luckily we had just like the most dedicated genius editor, this guy Dan Garber, but we had to kind of figure out how to do all of those screens. And so early on we decided that, you know, all of the cut-ins would exist in kind of that two-dimensional Unfriended space. But that was a movie that I think really helped us even just kind of conceptualize what a cinematic screen looks like in that kind of a way.
So yeah, that's a long time to edit. You've been with the movie for 3 years. You're on our podcast promoting it right now. I mean, how do you keep the enthusiasm for your film as so vibrant as it clearly is?
Oh, it's gone. It's not. Yeah. We're just tapping into something very old. You know, I mean, it's that's like a half joke. I think it's definitely at a certain point you need to kind of find a way to say goodbye to your movie.
Yeah.
Because it gets to the point where you continue to want things for it. You know, I want it to be better. I want it to be on do this, do that, but you kind of have to stop. And so I think that's at least where I am right now is I'm trying to process what it is, and to kind of, you know, make my peace with that. But it's a part of you. I think it's like a child.
Yeah, it feels a lot like our kid is going to college or something, and we're like, okay, you're done now. Like, you're out in the world, and what people are going to say, what they're going to say about you, and people are going to engage with you, how they're going to engage with you. But, you know, like, we raised you, and now we're done. And I think,
I'm proud of you. I'm going to talk to people about how proud I am of you, but also I resent you for leaving, and I just keep going over all the ways I parented you badly.
What's next for both of you creatively speaking? What's driving the new creative fires?
Money.
Cool. Tell me how that works, because I would love some.
We're doing another film together. It's another co-authorship. It is a film that, we conceived of last year that it's going to be with Blumhouse. It is also a thriller.
Another female-driven thriller. That's all Blumhouse will let us say. And then Issa's got a book. She's got a Cam memoir that she wrote that'll come out next year.
Cool.
And I'm working on a script about bodybuilding that originated with another writing partner, but that Issa is producing. So we've kind of got a number of different things that we're working on.
Yeah, and I think it's, we're very, even though maybe our next films are, less overtly political than Cam, we're still so, thrilled with the response to Cam and so committed to kind of this process that we've built, and we're really excited to see kind of how we can bring that into other projects and continue, we're going to have a manifesto for everything we ever do, I think, now. So
well, I have two questions left that I want to get into, but I would like to say I am a big fan of Cam, and I think my experience watching the movie, it just seemed like bold choices every step of the way, and I really look forward to people discovering it as a film as it lives on, having been released out into the world. I think you guys have done something special, and shit, if you guys want to make another female-centric movie with Blumhouse, I will be there opening day to see it, hopefully in the theater. I'm excited to see what you guys do next. I think that's great.
thank you.
So just to kind of get to know, what you guys dig. I mean, we talked about your sensibilities for what, went into script-wise and visual-wise for the film. But, we're at that time of the year where everybody's wrapping it up and talking about their favorite films of the year. What were your favorite films of the year? Do you have any that you want to call out that you enjoyed particularly?
Oh, boy. I'm going to call out one in particular because I think it's been the most underseen, underapplauded film of the year, which is Aaron Schimberg's Chained for Life.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a landmark movie. And it premiered at Banff Cinema Fest. We played together at a handful of festivals. But if you're not familiar with the movie, it's kind of a horror comedy, avant-garde film-ish. It's about a German filmmaker who's kind of a Fassbinder type making a movie set in an insane asylum with a cast of freaks. It's a movie about disfigurement and representation and how we engage with the people that we make movies about. It's really funny. It's beautifully shot. It's a real it's formally experimental in the most exciting ways, but I think it also interrogates the faces that we put on screen in a really poignant and kind of clear-eyed way that I've never seen before. And I think that it's incredibly frustrating in the moment that we are in talking about representation in film. It's a movie that has not played a lot of festivals, and that, the filmmaker has been told it's because people don't want to see these kinds of faces in films. And I think that it's a real testament to how much further we have to go in making and supporting movies that are pushing the conversation around representation in filmmaking and image making writ large. How much further we have to go.
Yeah, my wife actually saw it at Fantastic Fest this year and loved it, and I missed it, and I regret it. So I got to put it on my radar.
Put it on your radar and trump it up, because it's an important movie. That's my pick. Issa, do you have a separate one?
I mean, yours was so heartfelt.
I've practiced. I've already scanned this one a couple times.
Yeah, geez. Okay. I'm gonna say two festival picks too, because obviously I could be A Quiet Place, which is fucking incredible, but everyone already knows that. My two favorite films that I think I saw at the festivals this year were, one of them is Terrified.
Yeah.
It's an Argentinian film. I think it's on Shudder now.
Yeah.
It's incredible. People disagree with me sometimes. I loved it. That was, definitely hands down, probably my favorite. And then I really loved In Fabric too.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Peter Strickland. Yeah, I thought it was incredibly well done, and it was actually very riveting, which I was surprised by.
For a movie about a killer dress, it's
so good.
It's a killer dress. It's a midnight screening. I'm already half asleep, and then I was just like riveted the entire film. It was beautiful. So.
Was that the midnight screening at Fantastic Fest?
Yeah,
It was.
I was in that theater with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
That was a great movie.
Yeah, great film. Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for having us.
Oh, wait, one more question. One last question.
Billy, you're getting greedy.
Jump the gun.
How embarrassing. He's crimson.
I'm crimson.
That's okay. It's on me. I queued it up like it was the end of the interview. It's not your fault.
He's
It's my
vicious that
fault.
way.
Yeah, I that was a dirty underhanded play on my part. I'm sorry that I
It's
caused that
okay.
embarrassment.
Now you have
He loves talking about himself, so honestly, you could go off.
Yeah.
No, so the final question is, we are blessed to have many chances to interview independent filmmakers and talk about their experiences making movies. And I think the one commonality amongst all of them is that making movies is very, very difficult, and that making an independent movie is harder. And so one of the things that I like to end every one of these conversations with is, as you look back at your experience with Cam, or with your careers in general, is there a single moment that you lean back on when you are particularly low in the mix of trying to put together a film that gives you like the courage or something that makes it feel like all of this sacrifice is worthwhile?
Mine is like very Cam specific, but yes, I mean, it didn't come after, but I'm definitely holding on to this moving forward with our second film, and that was the first time someone came up to me at a screening crying, and it was a woman, and she was a sex worker or a former sex worker, and she was crying, and she touched my arm, and she said, "Thank you, that is the first time I've ever felt seen or respected by a movie." And that was the moment for me that was like everything was worth it for that one moment, and moving forward it just makes me feel like so ready to, no matter how hard the next film is, no matter how hard my book is, it can all be worth it for those moments, I think.
Stephen King tweeted about the movie.
Yeah.
That's my less heartfelt. No, I mean, honestly, I think for me, the audience reaction and what a movie can bring people is, I think, a huge part of it. But I think an even bigger part of it for me is, like, if I can keep doing this, I get to play make-believe for a living. And that's hard because that's an unnatural, dumb thing to do. And I think that when we talk about the difficulty, that's part of it. You're trying to play make-believe with a group of people and get paid for it. And then take that make-believe and bring other people into it. And I think that it's that whole dumb cycle that is what keeps me going, because it's ceaselessly exciting. And it's an opportunity to not only learn, but to bring people together. So I guess for me, the difficulty is the draw, because it's what makes it so important.
I think that those are two perfect answers. I love them both. Thank you so much for being so candid in the interview and for sharing so much of yourselves. We really appreciate that, and we're happy to have you along. We want to keep beating the drum for Cam and keep bringing it out to people so that they can see it and experience it as well. Where can people find you on the social medias?
I'm at Chrono Pictures, CHRONO Pictures on both Twitter and Instagram, and my brand is terrible.
It does need some help.
Lisa gives me notes, and then I ignore them.
Social media, how we love to hate it.
Yeah.
I'm at Issa is wrong.
Yeah.
On both. We recently got verified on both Twitter and Instagram. Netflix did it for us.
Congrats.
And I still periodically will walk into the room, and Issa will be on her phone, and I'll be like, "What are you doing?" And she'll just be like, I'm looking at my check mark. On social media, it means a lot to her.
Yeah, I'm sitting here like, the whole movie is about not deriving your validation from what people say about you online, but literally, that is all I do.
That blue check mark is pretty tight, though, so I get it. That makes sense.
One day,
it's
Billy.
very fancy.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks so much. We appreciate you coming out, and we love the conversation.
Shame. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
All right, are we ending it for real this time?
We are done. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, have a good one.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we are back. We've just hung up the phone on Daniel and Issa.
I feel like we say this a lot after these conversations, but this is like my favorite conversation.
This was
I
a
loved
great,
every minute of it.
great conversation. I really appreciate them for their time and for being so open and honest about the creative process and how much they brought of themselves to Cam. It makes me appreciate the movie even further.
Yeah, I think watching the movie, you realize that to make something so candid as Cam is, like that they have to be comfortable bearing themselves, at least creatively, in that way. And it's nice to interact with them in the conversation and find out that like that's very deliberate on their part, and that they have that like they're regular humans, right? And they've taken steps to invest in making that reality of their creative process. And I love that. The manifesto is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, and if I take anything from this episode, it's the idea of anytime I press play on a movie and a pair of breasts pop up, that somebody has gone and iced them. It's not a process I think about as a viewer, but I probably should.
No, and as soon as you think about that for even just a few seconds, you realize how terribly exploitative, like fundamentally, all of those interactions are.
Yeah. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I know that we did, and I sure hope you've watched Cam by now.
Yep.
And if we didn't convince you, Daniel and Issa certainly did. So yeah, go check out Cam. Go rewatch Cam. That's what I'm going to do.
Yep. And spread the good word. Introduce the film around. I think this is a movie that people might sleep on, and it's definitely worth looking at.
All right, Billy, where can we find you on the internets this week?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at WBDAS.
You can follow the other dorks, Lisa Gullickson, the wife dork. What? She's in the dork cave, hiding in the corner over there. Lisa, since you're here, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter
Yeah.
and Instagram
Uh-huh.
at Sidewalk Siren. Nipples ice free.
Oh.
No, that's
Except
a good
for
thing.
special
Oh.
occasions.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
It's a good thing. That's right.
Okay, well then, I'll get out of here.
And Brian Young, he can be found on Twitter at the Turtle Dork. Darren Smith, he can be found on Twitter at the Disco Dork. And I am Brad Gullickson. I can be found on all social medias at Mouth Dork. Take care, guys. Until next time.